Good morning. I am so pleased to be able to welcome all of you to our 48th Annual Travel and Tourism Research Association Conference here in this wonderful city of Quebec.
credibility does a fat, middle-aged English gentleman have to be stood in front of you? And I think the honest truth is the best credibility I can offer is I've visited 123 countries, so I am definitely a customer of your industry in a big way. And I've probably worked in 40 and lived in 10. So I have some international experience of the marketing task that you guys are trying to do, and that frankly you do far, far better than most other marketing sectors do, and you probably don't get the credit you deserve. Okay, so let's try and have a romp through, if we can bring up the presentation, hopefully. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. As we've already heard, I go on and on and on. So one of the first things I did when I got on the stage was start a timer that will at some point go off. And rather than you having to have one of those gong show kind of hooks that come and kind of forces you off the stage, when the timer goes off, I promise, even if I haven't finished, I'll just stop talking. And you can feel the release and excitement that will come with that. I'm still, oh yes, wonderful, wonderful. So always like to try and have animated starts. Now, everyone, when you're given a topic to speak on, the first thing, in the same way that I'm reliably informed all PhD students do the moment they've agreed their dissertation topic and all the rest of it, is you probably change it for another title, which you think sounds better. So that's basically what I did, okay? And the reason why I recognize in an audience like this is a bit more complicated than that, is I've used the word praxeology to try and explain something to you. And while I peer out into the audience, does anyone here know what the word praxeology means? Who wants to expose their intellect and skill? Oh, actually, very impressive. This is, I knew we were in a smart audience, and actually with lots of academics in the room, it was always going to be embarrassing that I shouldn't put a word like this in. But usually I put this word in because it basically makes you think I'm more intelligent than I actually am. Yeah? And the second reason for putting the word in, if none of you know what it means, is it makes you think I'm more intelligent than you are. Yeah, because I know a word that you don't, and therefore, by definition, I must be intelligent. And that's the truth of a lot of academic teaching, and I apologize for exposing that to an august group like this, yeah? But that's the reality of what's going on. And what we're trying to deal with here, what we're trying to deal with as marketeers, is how do people really make decisions? And the truth is, a lot of folksy stuff your mum taught you is probably more accurate than a lot of the stuff in a lot of marketing textbooks. And we'll try and deal with that bit by bit as we kind of go through it. So let's start with the beginning of human behavior, and take a look at some monkeys. So this is some work by a guy called Frans de Waal. There should be sound in the background. But basically, the monkey has to give you a rock, hands over the rock, and in return, the monkey on the right is getting a grape, and you'll notice the monkey on the left is getting cucumber. You got a monkey. I did got a monkey. I didn't cut his head off, though. Now, you can do this experiment with two monkeys side by side. You give them both grapes, they keep giving you the rock. You give them both cucumber, they keep giving you the rock. You give one of them grapes and the other one cucumber, which is seen as not as valuable, and you get this kind of reaction, okay? And the reason why this matters and is really relevant to the audience that we're talking about today is I'm the father of 4 teenage children. And I can promise you that for the next 20 years of their life, they will remember the time that you gave one of them something and not the other one something. And that bitterness and deep emotional response will sustain them for pretty much the rest of their life. I'm already 52. I'm hoping that, you know, by the time I'm 65, they might have forgotten some of these incidents, but I'm pretty sure they're not gonna. Okay? And that's the reality of what happens. And actually, for those of you who flew here, it was quite funny. So I fly everywhere in coach. And one of the interesting things about it in our company, we have quite a strict policy on it. The curtain is there for a reason. The curtain is there to stop riots happening on long-haul international planes. So that when you're given that funny little meal and the guy next to you is having filet mignon with a nice champagne, he's not sitting approximately 2 feet 6 inches from where you are, kind of, you know, demanding more. That's what the curtain's for. It's there to protect you. And that kind of behavior is an emotional response that drives pretty much everything we do, okay? Now, the second one, weirdly, that most research ignores is how we basically copy other people, okay? And that's best expressed by a bit of 1950s.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat
Actually, it's okay. Don't worry. I mean, this goes on for a bit longer than I'm going to show you. But trust me, they try it where the best thing about it is he's trying to look like he isn't turning around whilst actually copying everyone around it. And they try it with hats on and hats off and coats on and coats off. And basically in every situation, what I have already realized in this audience, and I'm eternally grateful to those of you who are laughing, you're making the people next to you laugh. And without you, I'd be dead. So I really appreciate that you're kind of keeping going. But that's the reality of what happens. Okay? So we'll just skip that, and we'll now go to a sport that I know is not actually super popular here in Canada, but you still play some. And I'll just show you something, even if you don't know the rules and don't care. Now, I'm British. I have next to no idea what's going on. I'm reliably informed that the 300-pound guys at the front are supposed to go hut, 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 and all run into one another, and this is not supposed to happen. I also actually am very lucky. I spoke at a conference with the market research director at the NFL about 6 months ago, and he reliably informed me that this is technically an illegal snap and shouldn't have been allowed. But it sure as hell didn't matter at high school in Texas or wherever it was that this happened. This is clearly a touchdown. And all I can promise you is that the people who've been tricked, and let's be fair, we know they've been tricked, because this is about context. You have an expectation of what's going to happen. When that thing doesn't happen, you can keep going for quite a while until people realize that something's gone wrong. But by God, for the rest of their lives, these people will not fall for this trick play. You basically get one go. You might get a second go if you're really lucky and you're patient enough. But you can't run this kind of thing all the time. And that's a bit like, actually, the convention of what's happening now. You're expecting I will come up here, hopefully say something mildly entertaining for kind of 40 minutes or something, and then shut up and go. And the reality is, if I started to undress now, even though Marion is now looking quite alarmed, I could get quite a long way before anyone would rush me on the stage and kind of prevent me, because there's a kind of convention of what's going on here that you're expecting. And don't worry, I've buttoned up already. It's okay. There's no trauma that you're going to experience here. We've already discussed cutting the heads off monkeys. So by comparison, me being naked is going to be the least of your problems. Okay, so let's kind of keep going with the context. What am I really saying is we make thousands and thousands of decisions every single day, and they're really dealt with through three lenses. And those three lenses represented a little bit by the videos. The first one, feeling. How we feel pretty much drives every decision that we make. Yeah? And in fact, all the brain science shows that if we stop being able to feel, we actually stop being able to make decisions. Yeah? It's very complex. We don't always understand how most of these things work, but we're pretty sure there's a vital link there. The second one's copying. The best heuristic we have as a society for learning is copying. And actually, weirdly, if you look at what's happening, it's very interesting in society at the moment. So we must be doing some of these things quite well, because we've gone from 2 billion people on the planet in 1950 to more than 7 billion people on the planet now. So we're an example of a species success story. Yeah? What's interesting about it is, of the 5 billion more people, 5 billion live in cities. Yeah, that's the reality. The growth we're showing is actually, and we're in one now, you know, in Quebec, but cities is where all the growth of humanity is coming. There is no one who is being born into the world to live in remote, rural, you know, places. There may be the odd person, we can all remember of one, who's leaving the city in their retirement to go and think that that's a much better thing to do. But if you look at, you know, the propensity of what's happening in society, and why do they live in cities? Because it's the best place for your labor to go a long way. So there's the joys of comparative advantage that, again, I'm sure the smart person who knew what praxeology is can probably explain that to you much better than I can. And the second bit is we're copying. Just copying off other people, because that's where it happens. Yeah? Out in the sticks on your own, you're having to work out how to whittle wood, how to make a knife. Fortunately, in the city, it would appear that these skills are not the primary function, and so we can develop much more exciting skills instead. Yeah, like, you know, being able to speak at conferences, that kind of nonsense. Yeah, so that's the reality, and framing is very important. And one of the things you learn when you talk to people a lot is that actually sometimes you have to find different ways of remembering the same thing, different ways of teaching the same thing in order for people to remember it. And it's the number of different ways that will give you more and more people understanding, rather than just saying the same thing again and again and again. And I'm again indebted to my 4 children for teaching me this fact, that actually they don't all learn math the same way, and they certainly don't learn math the way that I learned math, and they find it quite hysterical when I try to explain to them how I think particular problems should be solved. There's all sorts of, new exciting things that didn't exist when I was a kid, like number lines. What is that? I really don't get it, so apologies. Anyway. So the truth is, when we try and translate this into marketing, what actually matters? And I'm indebted, this is a client of ours in the parking industry, and what they really wanted to do was get more people to pay on their cards. Pay on credit cards or debit cards, they didn't really mind. They just wanted more people to pay for their parking, not using cash, and by using the machine. That was really what they wanted to do. And we tried all the classic obvious things. We mailed people, we enrolled them in programs, we gave them more loyalty points, we even gave them money, we even stood people at the parking garages as they came in and told them about the ability to pay by card. We told them on the way out as they left, and we had someone by the card. And what was the single biggest and most successful intervention that we developed after a year of trying, I kid you not, was this. Okay, now it's sad and embarrassing to reveal that the smart minds in our company basically came up with putting a yellow line around it, and this was the best intervention because single-handedly it doubled the number of card transactions. Okay, it was way better than anything else we tried. And sometimes I think in your industry and all across marketing, we basically underestimate simple stuff that works in favor of stuff that either makes us sound smarter or seems like it was harder or involves, epic quantities of effort to kind of make them go. Okay? And this was another wonderful example. I apologize. So this is female contraception. If I start having a look at this, there was a joke a long time ago. It must have been invented by a man because it was a tablet you had to take for 21 days, stop taking for 7 days, start taking again, and if you missed any of the days, the prophylactic effect of the tablet was severely reduced in its efficacy. Okay? Now, that sounds like the dumbest thing you've ever heard. If you want to work with people's human behavior, you basically give them a tablet that you take every day. Okay? Now, that's what most of them happen. So most female contraceptive pills, apologies, I don't take them, but I'm reliably informed they come in a thing and you take one every day, and all they did was make the other 7 sugar pills. And then you just kind of keep taking them. And this was a very interesting intervention in Africa where they had a large problem with female anemia, and all they did was replace the 7 sugar pills with 7 iron pills and dramatically reduce anemia amongst women. This particular example was in Kenya, but I know it's been done in quite a few other African countries now. Now, what's interesting about this for me, is it's working with the grain of human behavior. Indeed, we have a lot of problems, for example, antibiotic resistance, and Rory Sutherland, who we work with sometimes, a kind of good friend of System 1 group, sorry, even I have to System 2 think about it for a minute, but the reality of what happens when you work with him is he thinks that what you should be doing is giving all antibiotics in a course, and you say, take all the white pills and then the 4 blue pills, and most people would complete the course of antibiotics, and we wouldn't have the development of antibiotic resistance. And I think sometimes in governments there's lots of opportunities to try and experiment with some of these things, because by God, they're probably going to work better than the way they do now. In fact, on antibiotic resistance, just because I was working with someone in the UK government on a similar scheme just a moment ago, they've been very successful in the last 2 years in significantly reducing the prescription of antibiotics simply by writing a letter to all the doctors in the top 10% of antibiotic prescribers and just telling them that they're in the top 10% of antibiotic subscribers, and their prescriptions reduced by about 70%, and I think it saves us £16 million a month in the UK just from those doctors' reduced prescriptions. So it's things like that. It's just trying to kind of understand what is the outcome that you want, what is it people are doing that you want them to do. And again, I think in your industry, most people think that's pretty obvious. We want more people to come and we want them to come more often. So how do we do this in statistical terms? Now, again, I'm not going to ask you, you've already proved you were smart, but the reality is, which one of these is worth more? 50% off, 50% extra free, and the truth in the maths, I won't embarrass anyone, I did do this in front of 600 maths students once, and it was quite impressive. The truth is, the word free acts on us like a kind of bizarre kind of catnip. We're almost powerless in the face of its immense efficacy, so much so that in plenty of countries, whether it's Belgium or Germany or something, they have laws about, you know, how you can use the word free and when you're allowed to use it and in what circumstances, and it really matters. But the truth is 50% off is a better deal than 50% extra free. But actually, if you reverse that situation, this was a great academic study done, and you make it 35% off and 50% extra free, which near as damn it are the same thing on a pence per mil comparison. If we wandered along the aisles of supermarkets in life doing pence per mil comparisons, then you would expect a 50-50 outcome. But actually, if you do it like this, the truth is 50 is a bigger number than 35. Yeah, full stop, end of story. That is the maths that we're good at. And anything outside that is probably a bit of an effort, and I'm probably not going to bother. Even weirdly, for really valuable and expensive things, you know, it happens all the time. Indeed, I spoke once at a conference of 6,000 accountants, and I spoke to them about branding and brand value. I had tons of very hard work charts looking at the performance of the FTSE and the S&P and so on over like 30 years, and lots of analysis and so on. In the end, I asked them 3 simple questions. I asked them how many of them knew how to do investment appraisal. So it's what accountants do for a living. 6,000 accountants stuck their hand in the air. We were pretty good at this point. I asked them how many of them owned a car. And again, 6,000 accountants stuck their hand in the air. And I then asked them how many of them did an investment appraisal on that vehicle before they bought it. Likely to be the second most expensive thing they ever buy after their house. Yeah? And 6 of the saddest people you've ever seen in your life sat in the front row where they'd probably been since high school. They'd kind of like done it. And the reality was everyone else had basically employed that very scientific and effective choosing technique of going into the car showroom and going, I want that one, maybe in red. That's the reality of what's going on. And these are the people who even had the skills to do the analysis versus the people who aren't. So there's a kind of context about here, which is most people aren't really doing the maths. So we have lots of mental shortcuts we use, and the truth is we think a lot less than we like to think we think. And those mental shortcuts are controlled to a degree, and I'm indebted to all the brilliant work done by people like Daniel Kahneman and so on, by a kind of lazy policeman who sometimes can be roused from his slumbers to come and kind of check whether what you're going to do is either going to kill you or leave you worse off, yeah, in some way. That's the reality of what goes on in most of our decision-making processes. So we're trying to understand. There are lots of great books popularizing the behavioral sciences, and we're trying to say, well, if that's true, how would I apply that to marketing? What truths are self-evident? What can I find out in the kind of facts that would help with this? So I'll just give you 5 quick ones. So the first one, as we said, we think a lot less than we like to think we think, and we basically make very fast, quick decisions. And then we sometimes use our system 2 to kind of rationalize those to make them seem sensible. And there's lots of great academic work that supports this. A perfectly good example sometimes actually with things like cars. The moment you bought a car of a particular brand and make, you suddenly spot all the other ones like the one that you've just bought. But up until then, your ability to guess how many of the other one is available is almost non-existent. You know, we're terrible at guessing some of these things, the prevalence, the frequency of certain kind of things. We're pretty bad. And I think that's the reality of what we're saying. It's really not a considered, conscious, thoughtful process. That's not what people are doing in the aisles of the supermarket of life. Yeah? The second one is stories. Stories trump everything. In fact, that's one of the things you guys do to your colleagues, to your partners, to your industry colleagues. It's the story of how well, you know, Quebec did, or how well some other, you know, Dubai, for God's sake. I mean, I first went to Dubai in 1989 as a newly minted brand manager in Unilever. And apologies to anyone from the UAE or in that part of the world. But, you know, godforsaken bit of desert in the middle of nowhere. And now it seems to be this epic, airport hub. But not only is it an epic airport hub, it seems to be this cool holiday destination that certainly in Europe, everyone kind of goes to for a few days of fun and sun, the kind of Vegas. Now, if you told me that you could build Vegas, well, I mean, Vegas was built in the desert. That's the whole point, yeah? There's a kind of context about this, that someone had a vision, started doing things, and that's the outcome of where it kind of came to. So it's really about the story that you're trying to tell that works. The third one, and I apologize for this, but this is the harshest truth of modern marketing. We're all slightly obsessed with loyalty. And there are loyalty programs, and there are probably 50 people on stages around the world as we speak now, talking about the customer experience industry and the value of loyalty and all the rest of it. But the harsh reality in a lot of this is that most customers in every single industry mostly buy other things and sometimes buy you. That's the maths. And everyone, including us, so apologies, about 7.5, 8 years ago when I first arrived at Brain Juicer, as it was then called, I had this brilliant brainwave of what if, instead of our growth strategy being focused on trying to get more customers, what we did was we just took our 5 largest customers and doubled them in size instead. Wouldn't we all be wealthy, and wouldn't everything be perfect? And there began pretty much the crappiest year in Brain Juicer's history, because it's very, very hard to do that. And weirdly, there's a graph and a curve and a power law that pretty much controls how that doesn't happen. Yeah? You can't always identify this group of people and say, oh, we'll just double with them, and we won't worry. What you really got to do is keep growing. Keep growing with everybody as much as you can, and that's how it works. And that's what we, by and large, tended to learn. And when there are fits and starts in that growth, and trust me, no one has a nice straight growth line, that's really what you're then trying to work out. The problem you're almost always trying to solve is penetration. And the problem you're very rarely able to solve differently from the nature of your industry is loyalty. Yeah? Now, sometimes in the margins, there's money to be made in small amounts, but the truth is the curve looks pretty much the same for everyone. The next one, new buyers. This is, again, the same point, really about penetration. You can't increase your brand's market share by just targeting existing users. That's the same kind of point in large. And again, what have we derived out of all of our learning over a number of years working with clients? It's about 3 things. We tried to make them a heuristic that's easy for us to remember, so that when we stand up and speak, we don't forget what we're talking about. And the reality is it's fame, feeling, and fluency. And we'll try and explain those in a bit more detail as we come through now. So, what drives brand growth and how do we measure it? And this is true in the brands that you're dealing with, whether they're kind of destination brands or country brands or whatever they are. We make quick, intuitive, emotional decisions. We don't tend to weigh up many options. When we have options, we tend to choose on autopilot between a small selection. 3 to 7 seems to be optimal. So what are we really saying? You need a long-term focus on these 3 things. So the first one's fame. If a brand comes easily to mind, it must be a good choice. That's what you're battling with. And in fact, there was a great chart in one of the decks where that kind of spontaneous fame is really what matters. Prompted, don't care about prompted recall once you're kind of telling people. It's just spontaneous. If you wanted to go on a city break this week, if you wanted to go on a long-term holiday with your family, if you wanted to go, whatever the choices are, whatever comes first to mind is pretty much going to be a perfect reflection of current brand share in those markets. Yeah? And we see it time and time and time again across all the categories that we do research in. Yeah? Second one's having a think about how you might portray that. I thought with this audience, embarrassingly, this is going to go horribly wrong, but we'll just try it very quickly. So the first bit, which is the biggest city, London or Lima? San Diego or San Antonio? Tokyo or Istanbul? Bangkok or Bangalore? Now, the reality is most audiences tend to go for the 4 on the left. You're a bit smarter than the average. So most audiences tend to go for the 4 on the left, and it's actually the 4 on the right. And if you do a fame index, this is where you can cheat. Yeah? The reality is the 4 on the left are undoubtedly more famous, but they're not actually bigger in terms of population. But in terms of international visitors, I'm pretty damn sure that they win by a country mile. Yeah? And that's the reality of what's going on in these kind of like markets. Yeah? You're trying to win a popularity contest or a fame contest you may not even know you're in. Yeah? That's the reality of the game you're playing. The second one's feeling. So if I feel good about a brand, it must be a good choice. Yeah? We said our feelings drive our choices, so let's have a think about how that works in reality. So we'll just show you a couple of things. Apologies, I wasn't going to get political. But it doesn't matter, actually, what you feel, whichever side of the red-blue divide you happen to sit on. The reality is we have some perceptions. Yeah? And we have a strong kind of visceral emotional reaction. And there was a favored brand for a long time, VW, and then suddenly there's a bit of a scandal about, you know, ooh, are they cheating? Cheating here in the US, we're going to pay billions of dollars in fines, cheating in other countries as well, trying to, you know, have a mechanism that defeats how they're measuring emissions. Now, the truth is with all of those, they had some perceptions before whatever it was happened, you know, and they have some perceptions after, whether that's, you know, in VW's case, bit of a corporate scandal. We still don't know how much of a scandal we're going to have with Donald, but what we do know is he's president of the United States. So even though we think about that in terms of kind of feeling, it was very interesting very early on when we were looking at some of this stuff, how strong some of those feelings were. I'll talk to you about it more in the context of fluency. And then the last one is speed of recognition. If I recognize it quickly, it must be a good choice. And that's a bit like trying to find members of your family in a football stadium or something. You know, if I put the 5, 6, 7 members of your family in front of, you know, 40,000 other people, and you're trying to kind of scan and find them, you know, you will have been doing that when you came into this room to see people you already knew from last year's conference or the year before, or your fellow board members. We are pattern recognition machines, the like of which, you know, even the best computing in the world hasn't even got close. There's a fantastic game, actually, Microsoft run, trying to get computers and AI to recognize all sorts of things. And all I can say is it's terrifying how we get so excited about certain aspects of AI, and a 4-year-old child would beat them by a mile. Yeah? And we're all going, whoa! You know, it just about recognized a baseball bat from a stick or something. And, you know, every child you ever meet everywhere in the world can do that without, you know, worrying about it from that kind of like age. Yeah? And so we have to get careful sometimes that we're getting very excited about certain things that are still pretty rubbish compared to how good we are. And actually one of those, when we talk about feeling, is in recognizing emotion. So everyone's very excited, facial recognition. Trust me, I've tried pretty much every version of them out there, and they're mostly pretty terrible. They're good at smiles. If you smile, most facial recognition systems are pretty good. Any other kind of emotion, pretty terrible. Yeah? Actively bad, I would argue, in most situations, and dangerous to misread quite that badly. You would be classed as, I think someone just did it on one of those autism test scales, and every bit of facial recognition technology is in the severely autistic end of the spectrum. So, you know, it's just to give you a sense of, you know, it's hard to do this. 50,000 years of evolutionary biology has made us quite good at it. Yeah? And we might have to wait a few years while the computers catch up. So it's really about recognizing a brand quickly, and what are the tools that people recognize quickly? Very relevant to the discussion. Okay, so we'll just play a quick game. Guess the brand. That sounded almost Italian. I'm hoping that was someone from Italy. And Starbucks. I'm not even showing you the brand. Yeah, I'm just picking stuff out of their logos, and you all recognize it, very trained, nice, kind of like audience. That's the reality. And the truth with these kind of games, it's a bit like recognizing your partner, okay? So I could be upside down, covered in shampoo, and my wife would recognize me. from strange angles, in strange positions. That's the reality. That's what happens. We get very good at this pattern recognition for things we see frequently and often. We're just not as good with people we just met. So, I'm going to do a very good job today because unless Marion changes her dress, I will definitely recognize her the next time I speak to her. But if suddenly you whisked her outside and changed something about her, I might embarrassingly, even though we met, half an hour ago, have to admit, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I don't know who you are. It's that kind of thing, and that's why you wear badges. That's why the badges have big names on. This kind of stuff really matters. It's trying to make a pattern, and then once you've seen them 2, 3, 4 times, we're all pretty good at remembering it thereafter. Yeah, most of us, sometimes. Okay, so these are distinctive assets, whether it's the M's, the colors, the little box they put your Happy Meal in. There's some stuff for Stella Artois on the bottom that works quite well. We've done lots of kind of tests on these things. You're trying to understand what is it about you that people recognize. And I'm terribly sorry to say this because Quebec's a lovely city and I've been here for the first time. But when you asked me before I came what I knew about Quebec, even after the brilliant presentation on the history, I would have, flunked. I was a class F. No idea. Literally no idea. That it was in Canada, tick. That it was in the French-speaking part of Canada, tick. That it probably was very nice and had a lovely old town or something and was on a river, tick. Pretty much everything else, I'm terribly sorry, no idea. Yeah? And that's the game you're playing. You're trying to make it so that some of the things in my head are, whether it's a weird piece of sculpture or something, the amazing art you have around your city, or, the museum or whatever it is, those are the things that happen. And weirdly, when I look at what happens in yours, it's actually about the same pattern recognition. Why is it London's always showing Tower Bridge, even though, frankly, most people who go in London never go across Tower Bridge, never go to Tower Bridge, have never visited Tower Bridge, have never been to there. But we all know it's in the city, and it's one of the things that tells you which city you're in. Yeah, Red London buses, whatever these kind of things are, they're the distinctive assets that remind people, even if, again, lots of tourists don't go on a bus. Trust me, it's too hard to find a way around London on a bus if you don't know where you're going and you don't speak the language very well. Then trust me, you're going to go and see some interesting bits of London you really weren't expecting to see, because trying to work out even which direction it's going in, we like to make as hard and complex as possible for you to understand in order to separate the sheep from the goats. That's the reality of what happens in most cities. Yeah. So you even get lots of examples in a branding sense of people cheating. I apologize for outing large supermarkets, but in the UK this definitely happens. So McVitie's is the biscuit brand who invented the ginger nut. Apologies if you've not come across the ginger nut. Your life is the poorer for it. I recommend you come to the UK immediately and try one. It's a fantastic biscuit. Even maintains its integrity when it's dunked in your tea. Vital in the UK kind of society. But the reality is they just rip it off and make something that looks exactly the same. And it does pretty well. And if one of them's £1.12 or something at the bottom and it's 69p for the one at the top, then I'm afraid people who are wandering through a supermarket trying to make a selection from somewhere between 5 and 50,000 items where they're trying to choose maybe 50 to 70 items in less than 30 minutes, they don't really care. They're just, picking whichever one looks like the one that they thought they were going to have. And the only people who are spending ages looking at it usually is like, if my wife has told me to get something and I'm not sure I'm getting the right one, then I'm a good 10 minutes in front of that fixture trying to work out, is that the one we have in our bathroom? Is it that purple? I'm pretty sure it's that purple. Because for me, the emotional cost and consequence of coming home with the wrong one is kind of like proving I don't love her. And that goes down really poorly. So I'm really going to invest in that extra effort. And this is another great British icon, Pimm's. You make Pimm's in large jugs with lots of lemonade, and it tastes like you're not drinking alcohol. And after about a jug and a half, you lose the power of speech. And you cease to be quite as entertaining as you thought you were when you'd had half a jug. So that's the kind of context of what happens with Pimm's. So what really mattered in the fame context, and I wanted to show this in Fluency because it was very relevant, was who was the third most recognizable person in the US election. And this was in January, before Donald had, it was about 2 days before Donald declared that he was even going to run. And who came third in our recognition contest? Yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't want to be unfair to poor old Marco Rubio, but you know, I think even his mum probably was struggling to work out. Oh, it's a picture of Marco, but you know, he wasn't getting good kind of recognition amongst the wider U.S. public, even in a bit where this is all about the election and you're trying to guess the candidates and you can barely work out who's who. And what was interesting about who came third was just Donald's quiff. Yeah. Will comfortably beat all the other candidates. And that's, again, what I mean by distinctive assets. Okay? You can laugh about it as much as you like. You can worry about how much product is required to create that particular kind of like hairdo. But the truth is, it's part of him. It's what helps us recognize him. And that recognition is what gives him an electoral victory in the US, yeah, when it comes down to it. Yeah? And they played the game really well of trying to damage some of the other distinctive assets on the other side. Yeah, they can be positive and negative. So that's the reality. Just so you ever get a sense, this is a little bit how we measure it. So the key difference, both with fame and fluency, is time pressure. If you put people under time pressure, you get more System 1 responses. I can show you tons and tons of brand lists that we get all the time where you get completely the wrong answers by giving people far too long to answer your questions, far longer than actually they're ever going to spend. So if you want to pick a sad nerd like me, I can name 91 different car brands if you leave me alone for long enough. Yeah? I've worked in the car industry on the advertising side. I'm kind of a bit of a car dweeb. So the reality is you can just keep rolling out obscurer, weirder kind of car brands left to your own devices. But if you put me under time pressure and you have a big clock counting down and you give me, say, 10 seconds to answer, I'm much more likely to give you the 2, 3, 4, or 5 that I'm going to choose from when I buy my next car. And I think that's very relevant. It really makes a difference. We see it mattering all the time. So time pressure, time-pressured salience of some kind is really what you're trying to kind of find out. The same with feeling. Apologies for this slightly manky set of faces, but we've been using them now for comfortably in excess of 10 years. They've been shown to, I can't remember now, the last time we counted, I think it's something like 11 million people in 100 different countries, and it's all based on the work of Paul Ekman, works really well. We keep trying to beat it with the best facial recognition technology we find, and so far we don't think we come close. And that's the reality. We're just trying to ask people, how do you feel? These 7 basic emotions. For those of you who've read a lot of Paul Ekman, you'll realize we cheated and invented a new one called neutral. And weirdly, what we've uncovered that really helps us is you're trying to avoid neutral. Meh is not good in marketing. And there's a staggering quantity of it out there. There's a lot of meh. And you're really trying to stay away from it as much as you can. And then fluency, lots of different ways of doing it. But again, usually we're trying to show you things that are distinctive and then trying to see if you can recognize them and attribute them correctly. Also under time pressure. We've been doing this for quite a while. This is an attempt to correlate it, trying to explain the next movements in market shares. Is it going up? Is it coming down? By how much? And how well are they doing? And this is quite a good correlation, we feel now. So we're kind of quite comfortable that it starts to predict. And why does it predict? And I think it's really down to these 3 heuristics that are driving our choices. The first one is experience. Our own experience trumps everything else. So you can tell me that, I don't know, apologies if there's anyone Nigerian in the audience, you can tell me that Abuja is the coming destination, but I've been to Abuja, and I'm never going back. Unless it's for an obscene amount of money that would transform my life. It wasn't great. Now, that's the harsh truth of what happens. Our experience carries a far greater weight than anything else. So if your experience of the best restaurant in Quebec is that you went once and the wine waiter was a bit sniffy and you didn't have a great meal, it's a rubbish restaurant. It doesn't matter what 10,000 other people say if your own personal experience says it's rubbish. And what's interesting about it is how sophisticated it can be. Why this is a picture of a boat. I went sailing with a friend of mine. I'm not a great sailor. I used to be crew because I was heavy for a guy who was a great sailor. And what was interesting to me was you go on a boat with him, and for me, it all sounds weird. The flapping of the sail, the wind in the rope, everything sounds weird. And for him, he would just sit there until he heard the one thing that made him worry, and then like something was going to happen. We were either going to capsize, or it was all about to go horribly wrong. And that's what you get through experience. You get that really learned System 1 sense of what am I worried about. Yeah, and you get that in your jobs, in your industries all the time. When is the scandal coming, or what do you do when the scandal happens, or whatever those kind of things are? That's professional, learned, successful experience. Second one's emotion. We've already talked about this. How we feel really drives. And then the last one's pattern recognition. So much so, this is the weird thing where we see faces in everything, even when they're not faces. That's how good our pattern recognition system is. It's trying to find faces in everything. Yeah, in everything you look at. I'm indebted to Tumblr and memes and the internet. There are billions of these out there of people spotting faces where there aren't actual faces. Yeah, we're amazing. Yeah, so that's the reality of what's going on. So let's talk very quickly about telling stories. I recognize I started a bit late, but we're almost on time. Little bit about storytelling. This is a great book by a guy called Christopher Booker called 7 Basic Plots. And these are the 7 basic plots. And for those of you who don't like reading the kind of gubbins I put on slides, and you can have all these presentations afterwards, I picked movies that might remind you what those stories basically are. So apologies, all classification errors are mine, but it doesn't matter. So that's the context. We're based around universal stories, and we're trying to understand those stories. I actually think storytelling might be a really useful tool for what you do in marketing, because it is so visceral and happens over such a long time. There's a lot of talk in your industry about history and those kind of things. These are accretive stories that build up over kind of like time, and it's a bit like family stories. Yeah. So if you get my kids up here, they basically tell you, I only have 10 stories, and I repeat them ad nauseam. And once you've heard the 10, they don't really get any better. But the truth is, I've got more practice at telling them. Yeah, that's really how it kind of like works. This even works for brands. So most brands have a story. Apologies, I'll just explain the first one just because it's relevant. So the BBC, in the UK, it's our British Broadcasting Corporation. It's quite well known internationally. And we basically assume it's this kind of comedy thing on the edge of chaos every moment, that it's always going to be doing stupid things. But deep down, we love it. And we hope that it has a happy ending. We're desperate for it to have a kind of happy ending, even though we lambast it and take the Michael out of it at all times. Sorry, that's a polite way of trying to say make fun of it. So that's the reality. We try and write these stories for brands, try and test them, and then try and tell the best story that you have permission to tell. That's kind of what you're trying to do in the kind of context of industry. And I'll just give you a very quick example of Tesco. So the Tesco is a big British supermarket, probably a little bit of hubris. It decided to set off around the world. It was so successful in the UK, and it would teach everyone else how to do supermarket retailing. And it went off to Korea, and it went off to Thailand, and it went off to various countries in East Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and decided, we're going to be wonderful. It even more embarrassment went off to the US. So fresh and easy, that abject opportunity of taking £1 million and burning it in a large pile. That's basically what Tesco's did in the US. And that's the reality. You're trying to test the stories that work. Now, Tesco's have a bit of a scandal. So they had an accounting scandal where they were clearly cheating about how they added up their numbers. They had a whole series of setbacks in market share. It's kind of interesting trying to understand, so what happens next? And this was really what we tried to kind of like test for. So we took these stories, and then effectively you're saying, what proportion are saying that's a credible story? You're doing credible versus least credible, so they're picking between them. And then a little bit, how do you feel? What's the emotion you feel if that story came true? Yeah, it's just an interesting way of trying to parse the different stories apart and trying to see what the story was telling. And the reality is, as you can see, Tesco was the top story, but actually we felt there was a lot of potential in something like Rebirth. Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity for Tesco to do something kind of like new. And that was really where we tried to work on. So this was the current story. All the stuff in pink is just straight consumer verbatim. So we use a kind of open-ended text box kind of thing that's quite smart. And this is just, you know, this isn't our words. This is us basically putting connectives between their words. And the same, the opportunity we felt was a better kind of rebirth story, and that was really the kind of context of the story. And it helps with lots of problems. I think one of the things we see all the time is any kind of crisis. Everyone's suddenly terrified whether their story has changed or not. And I think what you find with some of these is you either just have to be a little bit patient, or there's something you can do that would help make your story turn out not to be the drama, the problem that you think it is. Yeah, and I think what you probably know much better than I do, and I've seen lots of excellent studies on this, is if you're, I don't know, apologies for bringing these up, but if you're Tunisia and some madman has appeared on your beach and killed 38 tourists, I think 22 of whom were British, you know, sorry guys, but some people are not going to come for a bit, and that's the nature of the beast. Yeah, there's not much you can do. No amount of advertising or encouragement or price reduction is really going to overcome some of those problems. Yeah, that's the reality of how it works. Yet weirdly, in some environments, you can overcome those things if your story, your narrative, is somehow stronger than that. Yeah. And I think to anyone who's involved in the tourism London or something, you know, what London basically is hoping is, having had 20 years of relative stability where, frankly, we're more likely to get run over by a car or a bus. We've now had a couple of incidents in quick succession. And what we're hoping is that the pound is so weak that your desperation to come and buy something cheaply is going to overcome your concern that, you know, terrorists are on the streets of London at all times. And I think that's the kind of narrative sometimes that you're trying to deal with in your industry. What are the choices you have in those kind of environments? Sometimes people don't notice it. I just wanted to talk a little bit also about advertising very quickly. Basically, it's about happiness. Yeah, I apologize for shamelessly. So that's me. I said I'd shut up. I'm going to go for a little bit longer. I apologize. I've still got another 5 minutes, so I'll keep going for another couple at least. But it's really about happiness. I probably won't go through this case study, but the IPA, if you've never come across it in the UK, have done a great case study looking at campaigns over time. And the truth is, emotional campaigns do better than rational or combined. Yeah? And they set out in this study to prove that what they thought would happen is a combination of rational and emotional messaging would work best, and they were slightly confused by their findings to discover that emotional seemed to do better than everything else. And the longer your campaign goes on, the more true this is. Yeah? What they also did, and this is the latest work from Les Binnett and Peter Field, was have a look at, everyone's very excited about digital. You know, email marketing makes us feel that some of these things are kind of free, you know, free opportunities. If all I had was their email addresses, everything would be transformed and I could just spam them daily with thousands of messages and everyone would come. That's the reality. And what it really shows is that actually brand building takes time, but gets you on an escalator that, you know, kind of moves up. Whereas what we see with a lot of digital campaigns is you get the short-term blip and then you go back to where you were, and short-term blip and back to where you were, and sometimes very hard to do the equation that shows that you're in any kind of like upward growth. Yeah, that's the reality. It's really funny, when I was trying to explain this to one of my children who showed a passing interest and then I captured them, they basically pointed out something I never thought of, which is I'm indebted to my wife. This is, you know, my personal growth is her kind of mission. I'm on that kind of like upward escalator to try and kind of like improve me. And left to my own devices, I was the sad sack who was going out trying to find someone who liked me enough to go to bed with me, and then kind of, you know, going to this very sad lifestyle on my own. And I suspect that's a framing task I'm just trying to kind of put up. I think all of your brands, all of your markets, there's a kind of upward story you're trying to tell, and that takes time and effort to create, and I'm not sure that what we see from a lot of digital campaigns is that can do it on its own. So, quickly go through happiness. This was a John Lewis case study that is a big UK retailer that I won't tell you about, but it was really, the only bit that was relevant was this. You always want to show, oh, we made a model, and our model almost turned out to be like real life. And that's because this is over about 6 years, so we're kind of quite proud of it. But, I mean, the sad reality is that's all I was trying to do, so you've seen it now. What also matters in stories, and I'm just going to show you one more ad, 2 more ads, actually.
dedication, loyalty,
Next week, buddy.
friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character.
And what was most interesting about this story for us was two things. One, this took quite a long time. So this was us working with a client. They made 7 scripts. We made 4 animatics. We recommended that they went with this one. We actually tested the film 3 times, once when they first made it, once when we'd had a big debate desperately trying to get them to remove as much of the long, turgid and quite tedious voiceover that they were desperate to have and replace it with just that little bit at the end. And then once at the end when just before they kind of like aired it. But I think the story, you know, this is a 30-second story. And that's the reality of what you're trying to deal with. Actually, it's almost 60-second story. I apologize, but that's what you're trying to deal with. This is storytelling at its best, and it's iterated and improved by the people who worked on it. And it's been very successful for Guinness. They've sold a ton of Guinness as a result. We tried to make a library, so we've been around the world testing tons of ads for the last few years. This was, if you've never seen it, a brilliant ad for toilet paper in France that was very successful. And it's all on a website if you want to go and have a look, the Fillmore 50. We test ads around the world. So what we've really learned, this is the conclusion bit. I'll try and do this as quickly as I can. One, the classical marketing model seems to get you short-term effects but little else. That's what we tend to find. That's what we're finding our clients frustrated about, and that's what we're trying to work out how to help them solve. The honest truth, we make a whole stack of mistakes, just like everyone else. We're just trying to not make the same mistake repeatedly, because that would be foolish. In terms of some basic things really matter in your industry, and I think these are so fundamental you can't get away from some of them. It's still about penetration and frequency, you know, how many people, how often, it's raw, and it really doesn't matter about the price level. We keep meeting people who go, oh, we're only interested in this tiny elite of people who spend all this huge, mega kind of like bucks. I think if you're tiny and no one can come, then doing something to make maximum value out of your scarcity, okay, that I understand. But the truth for everyone else is you're trying to get as many people as often as you can. That's the math. Yeah, that's what you're trying to do. The second bit that I think completely is underestimated, I play a game sometimes. I was speaking at a business school trying to ask people which industry had the lowest inflation I could identify over 60 years, and it's travel. Yeah, a flight to you know, the Philippines in 1967 probably didn't cost that much more in actual dollars. Forget the intervention of inflation now than it did then. Yeah, I mean that's the reality. It's ridiculous. We got some of these things where it's so cheap. It's amazing. Accessibility. I think you are valiantly. I did some work with the World Trade and Travel Council, Trade and Tourism Council, a guy called David Scalzo, who I once worked with many moons ago when he was at Hilton, and we were trying to do some stuff with them. All of the hassle stuff really matters. You guys have got to keep fighting to keep borders open, making it not too hard. You know, I know that there are lots of politicians who think they know what they're doing, but I know that you have the stats that tell them they wouldn't know their arse from their elbow and couldn't find it with a map. And I think you need to keep the pride and the truth that you have in trying to say that if you want to have a tourism industry, you've got to try and make some of these things as easy as possible. Fun, fast, and easy is what makes it solvable. And making it epic and hard is fine if you only want 5 people to come. But if you want 5 million, 50 million, 500 million, then make it fun, fast, and easy. And then the last one, safety and security. People's perceptions about safety and security are very weird. They bear almost no relation to fact. We sometimes have a game we also play about, how many people each year are killed by deer, how many people by swimming pools, how many people by guns, and how many people by sharks. And it's slightly depressing that if you put people down and get them to think about it for a bit, they pretty much can get most of those things in the right order. But if you ask them spontaneously and you put them under time pressure, they rarely get them right. You say, what are you most scared of or something? Then it's about fame, it's about feeling, it's about fluency, it's about your story and how you're using it to make it better. And that's very true in destination marketing, whether you're Quebec City or Quezon City. Everyone wants shortcuts, and I wish I was sitting up here with some fantastic snake oil that said, if only you do this, all of your problems will miraculously be solved. And the harsh reality is most of the good things you see, we discount all the work that's gone into them by the moment we see them and think they got it there easy. And it would appear that that's not true. So I'm going to leave you on a high. Let's watch with this. Now, the harsh truth, I don't know how many of you have horse boxes or even know anything about horses, but I show this ad as a man who sometimes gets out and lets my wife park the car. I have no shame. She's just really good at it. But the truth is, they just wanted to make you feel something, and that's all I did. So thank you very much.
Alex, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think that you saw the reaction from the crowd.
Thank you.
We are off to a great start thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alex will not be staying for the whole conference, correct? All right, so if you would like to chat with him, make it snappy because he will not be here very long. Can we have the next piece, please? No, not me. I think, as always, technology is wonderful when it works. All right, can we have this up? All right, so I would like to call on the sponsor, DK Shiflett, for our keynote speaker, Jeffrey. Thank you.
My first hat as chairman of the board of TTRA, I just want to welcome everybody to this amazing conference, thanking Marion and staff and all of her committee members for such a great job. So thank you, Marion. I want to give you a hand already off to a great start. DK Shiflett is really honored and proud to be able to continue sponsoring the work of the Travel and Tourism Research Association. We have been, our company's been members for many years and supported for many years. I have colleagues in the audience. We have many past presidents who've also been DK Shiflett employees at one time or the other. So we have very deep ties to the organization. What I'd like to do is I'm going to introduce Lisa LaVecchia. She is the president and CEO of the Ontario Tourism and Marketing Partnership, where she is inspired to elevate Ontario as the preferred four-season tourist destination in a globally competitive tourism market. Her passion and forward-thinking approach to integrated marketing and strategies have led to innovative brand campaigns that are progressive and powerful, which showcase the best of Ontario, including Epic Is On campaign and more recently, Where Am I campaign, both award-winning. Before joining Ontario, Lisa led the development of mass marketing and implemented cross-channel integrated marketing for Indigo Books and Music. She has previously held many jobs in the media and the account space in New York and in Canada. Let's welcome Lisa to the stage.
I'm a question wrapped in history. Inside a country, where am I? More water than land, fewer people than trees.
Where am
I am the smoke, but never the fire. Where am I? Ice formed me. A giant lives inside me. Where am I? I fall down, but never up. I'm in your heart, but not in your mind. I'm the riddle you have yet to solve. Where am I?
Answer this simple riddle.
I'm not Japan, Africa, or India, but they live here. I'm mysterious, but in a familiar place. Where am I?
Need another clue? It's 2 times the size of France and 4 times the size of the UK. Still don't have the answer? What if we told you this was Ontario, Canada? Surprised? So were 87% of Canadians. 1 in 309 Canadians from 480 cities played along, but only 13% got it right. That's right, not even people living in Canada recognized Ontario. And that was exactly the point we were trying to make. You see, Ontario, Canada had a tourism problem. Interest in travel within the province was in decline because Canadians thought they'd seen and done it all. So we advertised an exotic travel destination in TV, print, online, and on Instagram, but didn't tell summer trips nearly doubled. The campaign returned over $7 for every dollar spent, and it's just launched in the UK, helping Canadians and beyond discover that they have a lot more to discover about Ontario.
Yay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, Marion, and thank you very much, everybody, for TTRA. For many years, when I started this job, I'd heard Catherine Forjax, my esteemed colleague, who many of you know, always talk about this conference, and Karen Squires, I think you're here too from Ottawa Tourism, always talked about it, so I'm very proud to be here and very thankful, so thank you, Marion. The topic for today is, if I can get to the presentation here, sorry, now can you click onto the presentation? Is really gamification in destination advertising. And here in Ontario, Canada, not Quebec, but us in Ontario, the province that many of you Americans who are here is where Toronto and Ottawa and Niagara Falls is, we had a real challenge on our hands, and we decided to really think about it in a very different way. Much like what Alex was talking about a few minutes ago, just about that feeling, and we needed that fame and that fluency, we decided to take a very different approach. So I'm going to walk you through today kind of how we did that. And it really was through a game and asking a very simple question about our destination. So, Where am I? Well, right now we're at TTRA in Quebec, but can anybody guess where this is? Can you see one of our famous icons there? That's right. Actually, that began this whole process because it was imagery like this that we started taking and started working with our partners about the uniqueness of what we actually wanted to put forth, what was unique and special about our destination. And for many who know our great city of Toronto in Ontario, it's the CN Tower, but it's looking at the CN Tower in a bit of a different way. So if you could see, this was a great aerial shot that we had taken and that we started to use to really get people to think about us and wonder more about just what they already knew of us. So we had some barriers. As I pointed out and introduced to you earlier, Catherine Vorjaks, who's been with our organization for quite some time, has a lot of great research, and that's what all of you in this room do so very well, and we really appreciate as marketers having all that. But we had some key barriers that we really needed to address, and what that was is, in Ontario, we have Niagara Falls, we have Ottawa, we have Kingston, we have Toronto. We have great iconic reasons to come visit us, great experiences in our province. The only thing is that for years of historical advertising, people started to kind of really see that as a perception that they had of us and really didn't think much more past what we were showing them. The idea of what we tried to do this time was to think of it a little bit differently, to take the research, understand what it was telling us, address the barriers, and think about how we could do this in a unique way. What we decided to focus on was what people nowadays love to share. Everybody knows you've got your phone. I know I've seen many of you on them today. We're on social media and we're talking about things that make things special, make things unique. And really, it's about the unfamiliar. So yes, when you're on a trip, you want to hit all those great high points, all those great iconic places, but you love to go back and tell your family and friends about a little local place that you've got to try, or some place that was just down the road from the great attraction. And that was what we decided to do. We knew we had a barrier, and we wanted to be able to focus on the unfamiliar. Things that people just didn't necessarily have a story that they knew yet about, and we wanted to tell it. So if you look on the right there, Where Am I? Our campaign was really trying to focus on that unfamiliar. And actually on the right, do any of you know that place who are familiar with our great province? It's just actually down the road from Niagara Falls in the Niagara Horticultural Garden, a brand new, beautiful garden that is a great tourist attraction. So that's what we want to focus on, places and experiences like that. Our insight was really simple. It was being able to think about that unfamiliar and start to share it, to surprise people, to think about our destination in a completely new way by driving that emotion, that sense of pride, and that feeling that Alex was talking about earlier. This is actually a great shot. I actually was standing there at 5 o'clock in the morning to get that shot, and it is part of an incredible new exhibition, artist display in the beaches area of the Toronto area in the cold of winter called Winter Stations. It's actually been going on for 3 years where artists come from around the world and put on these winter stations along the beach. It's actually now driving with tourists who are coming from all over. And this was the type of experience that we really wanted people to understand that we were all about in Ontario. So the idea was, as I keep saying, really quite simple. It was to ask people really to learn more than just what they already know and ask a simple question. And you know, many of you who are on social nowadays know that you're posting a selfie or you're asking a question if you're at a Blue Jays game or wherever you might be. Where am I? I'm here, I'm here. And that was all rooted in the insight of what we were trying to do with this campaign. So what was the goals? As researchers and as folks that want to measure things, we absolutely knew what we wanted to do. It was to continue to build the brand awareness for our destination in Ontario. It was to be sure that really for us, yes, it's important to get web visits, we all know that, but it's the content on our site that leads to all of our partners. And at our organization, we try and bring value to our partners all the time. So it's about driving that traffic to them by focusing on some of those unique, special places in and amongst the province. And it was to make sure that we were all working within our province, aligned and integrated. as well as being able to add value to those partners by giving them opportunities to advertise in new digital and social ways. We did lots of research, Catherine, many markets across both Canada as well as the United States. And the qualitative, when you're doing something very different, you know, we had an animatic too. We made sure that we went in and tried to explain things. But when you're trying to really just at the end of the day evoke that emotion, you really want to be able to make sure you do that. And we were delighted that people kind of started to see our province exactly how we tried to drive it, which was in a surprising, unfamiliar way, saying things like, you know, I didn't know that existed. That's a place I want to go. That's somewhere that I want to share or I want to talk about with my family and friends. So we really learned quite a bit as we went through the qualitative process, and we were delighted that people were so positive about it, particularly when we also went into the United States. You know, we knew that there was a lot of things that we were showing in the advertising that they wouldn't necessarily know about, but we wanted to be able to seek and really kind of pique their interest and have that intrigue. And we created this game, so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how that went. So our qualitative, yay, was really well received, which is always for marketers, you know, just another thing that we're going along in our journey and making sure that we have. So we were thrilled about that, and like any good provincial marketing organization, we have lots of stakeholders and people that we need to kind of engage with. So you feel more comfortable as you move forward knowing that you have this kind of well in hand, and we did. Here's some of the things some of them said, which, you know, we were thrilled. Particularly if you take a look at in London, and if you think back at what I showed you, that 60-second ad of all the different places, you know, things like it's almost a bucket list of things I should take note of. Because what I said earlier is that people know about so many great things in our province, we were trying to get them to move around and do that unfamiliar. So we were thrilled when we heard things like that. I also like the top corner there for the gentleman in Detroit. We're so close to Canada. This is introducing us to a part of Canada that isn't so widely understood. And that, again, was part of what we were trying to do, is really kind of break all of those preconceived ideas or perceptions that people have and show them that there's so much more to us. The media strategy also, we didn't have actually a lot of money. We put quite a bit into our production because we are going to be staying this course for quite some time. So getting our media right was hugely important, and it really started off with having this big TV brand presence, but using social. This is a major social campaign that I'm going to walk you through, particularly because it is a game, and showing you how we did that through digital and social. Before I get into all of that, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the story of how we got here. This is the exciting part for people like me, how we did all of this. We took a lot of risks, and I wouldn't mind sharing you our story and how we did it if you'll give me just a moment before I get into all of those other details. But this is a shot of our director. His name is Andrew Cividino. Like many commercials that get produced, there is usually a director's roster list that everybody wants to currently work with. One of the first places that we took a risk, it was not only in this concept and doing this a little differently, but also who we chose to come and work with us as a team. So this director is a filmmaker, and it was important to me that we looked at everything from how we built this to who built it with us and thought about what they could bring to the table. So Andrew had just come off of a very big year at the Toronto International Film Festival, where he had won for his film of Sleeping Giant. And for any of you Canadians in the room know that Sleeping Giant is in the beautiful Thunder Bay in Ontario. So right away, we had a great Ontario director who had been a darling filmmaker. And this was a unique way of telling the story. So not necessarily in a way that usually we would have, but telling the story through a storyteller like Andrew. Andrew brought with him, again, a big difference in productions. For any of you who have ever been on a production set of a commercial, usually there's everybody from craft service to all the guys who are the PAs, the cinematographers, etc. Big change here too was the fact that there was 3 of them. 3 people who went across this great province of ours and were extremely nimble and agile. They shot everything in different ways. on film, on an iPhone, on a GoPro, on their knees, on ladders, up mountains. It was completely different way of doing things. And again, that's where I felt that the magic really started. I could see it there, that the way we were going about doing this was just entirely different from how our organization had ever approached this before. Next, it was 22 grueling days of going around the province and trying to capture the uniqueness, the faces you saw in some of that upfront video, the nuances of what people are doing in their everyday lives and these experiences was, again, part of what we were so excited to capture, and we have so much more that we hope to one day continue to bring our campaign to life. So I like to call this a little bit of our dream team. But in addition to Andrew and his great folks, we also had a band. I want you later to listen to the music, but it's a brand new indie band that's also called Bruce Peninsula, another famous place in Ontario. So this just kind of kept getting better and better in terms of, you know, a great Ontario director, a great band from Ontario, as well as a famous voice. So while keeping this budget as intact as I needed to, the voice is from a famous man who we couldn't afford, Donald Sutherland's son, Rusev Sutherland. Again, he brought a very uniqueness. He almost sounds like, you know, just this cool guy talking to you, really telling you this story, was another part of how we put all this together. So the experiences included 47 in total over those 22 days. So as we crossed the province, this was an epic production. It was 47 unique experiences, and not all of those have you seen today. I'm excited about the possibility of where we're going in the future, because we have so much more that we haven't even begun to use. And, you know, that was part of our plan, is that we were in this for the long haul, largely because we had felt it had tested well, we knew where we wanted to go, and we decided to invest in it. In our our online experience, all of those experiences are in categories. So we started to making sure that we were covering as much of the depth and breadth that the province had to offer. So how did this game work that I keep talking about? Well, it actually was in 3 phases. Initially, we never revealed who we were, and that was purposeful. We really wanted people to engage with us online through this game, and I'm going to walk you through that in a second. Then we revealed, so that to this great big kind of grandeur in some ways campaigns can do, where you buy heavy media at a specific time where you know people are going to be watching you. In this case, we did it all in cinema, a high point of summer. We revealed who we were, sustained then in phase 3 using digital and social. So that was a big part of this phased game approach. So in phase 1, what happened is we started to give people clues. We told them to come to a site where, as I showed you in the opening, that we gave them clues, largely on Instagram. We also were the first in Canada to use Instagram video. So we really kind of promoted all of this through asking a question of where might this be. In the second phase, when we did reveal ourselves, we then pushed all folks through redirects to our content on our site that gave anybody that you ever wanted to know information on any of these locations that you saw. In fact, we had travel itineraries, a trip planner, anything you needed to book and plan your trip against what you saw. And then 3, when we were sustaining, it was focusing on that social and that digital buy. So I get asked a lot of questions when I make this presentation on how things worked by asking a question and using a game. And it wasn't easy. The riddle was probably one of the hardest parts. You never want to actually make it so difficult that people kind of get frustrated and just, no longer want to be intrigued to find out who you are. But you want to make it interesting enough that they're actually engaging with each other through social, saying, I think it might be this, or actually I'm Googling it to figure it out. And, that was really kind of another part of the magic to this, is figuring out the right balance to keeping things somewhat simple, fun, and engaging. So on a deeper level, it really challenged them to discover who we were while keeping it, emotional and fun and uplifting. And we really were excited with the fact that we got such great feedback through social, that they liked it, that they found it interesting, that no one had done this before, and that it was just so unique. So we were very excited to be, in our minds, breaking a little bit of new ground in terms of how we went about this. So here is that intrigue, that giving you some examples, and I'm going to tell you where some of these places are. But this was cinema posters that we had kind of put all around our province and in border states is who we were focusing and targeting. And it was asking you to try and guess, supported by all the video that we were using. That's actually a beautiful church in downtown Toronto, the first one over there, St. Paul's Basilica. Absolutely stunning. People come from all over to see it. Has a great history. Once you figured out one of the clues, we would give you a lot of the history about the actual beautiful church that it is. Secondly, in the middle is one of our most famous provincial parks called Sandbanks that really does look like an exotic desert. You know, you have to wake up really early in the morning to get a booking at Sandbanks, because when it opens in the summertime, this is one of our more popular places. So again, but really promoting all that is in and around that incredible place. And lastly, kind of a unique and a bit of a strange, if you will, but it's Kensington Market, a very different, kind of almost bohemian, indie type market in the city of Toronto that really is here celebrating winter solstice. And they do that through fire and dance and music, and it's a really well-attended event that we got a lot of great footage during that time. Here are some of these clues that I keep talking about. So whether it was on Instagram or Instagram video, we were asking people a very specific question. So bear with me as I kind of look to read you some of those, because they're really quite interesting how we did this. And they go like this. Wooden giants bear witness, but are silent. So the first one over on your right is actually in Arrowhead. It is a skating rink through the forest in that park. It is extremely cool, super fascinating, and it's most popular at night. So the wooden sticks are just kind of those fun tiki torches, and people come from all over to skate through this park. It's actually become something more popular, but Arrowhead was one of the first ones to do it. Secondly, in the middle is the 7-second video I was referring to before, and it says, "The less you see me, the more you know me. Where am I?" Again, a little bit ambiguous, but intentional. And in the 7 seconds, you see more than just what's there. But that's actually a shot outside of our Aga Khan Museum, a beautiful new museum in Toronto. And then lastly, if any of you have ever been on our highways in Toronto, you would know that there's a very famous temple that took years to build by hand. And the clue is, I'm a 24,000 piece puzzle. Just wondering here if anybody knows that famous place. 24,000 pieces. It's actually Bap's temple that was all handmade, that people come from all over the world now to visit and see and worship in. So how did it do? In that intrigue phase over 10 days, we saw an incredible result. So many people wanted to know what the heck was going on, who was talking. Many of the media were calling. We intentionally told all our staff. We were all keeping quiet. And if I could do it all over again, I wish that these 10 days actually went on quite longer. The engagement was so powerful, I almost wish we had kept things under wraps a little longer. But we had quite a few unique visits and people guessing, as I kind of mentioned earlier. And we were just absolutely thrilled. And a lot of press were calling us, people wondering who it was, and it was kind of tough to really keep it all under wraps, but we did. 44,000 unique visitors, 27,000, I believe, total guests, 4,000 destination guests. I mean, we saw it all, everything from, this is Egypt, this is London, from all over the world. And people were just completely taken aback in terms of what people were saying with each other through social. Again, as I go through this presentation, you can see some of the ways we're trying to depict what makes us unique in Ontario. And this is a brand new shot of the CN Tower in a new way that we worked with our partners at the CN Tower to just try and show the grandeur and excitement of wanting to just see it instead of just the static on shot that we're all so used to. I see a few people kind of saying, yes, you know, you can get a little bit tired in terms of how you do the same old, and we were really trying to break that and think of this in a very different way. 13% got it correct. We thought for sure that people would actually kind of easily understand this, and that wasn't the case at all, which really was quite a bit of a surprise to us and we thought was terrific. You know, the other big thing that quite a few folks were cautioning us as we were going through this was the fact that we set up, you know, this website that wasn't the one that we really wanted everybody to go to. We set up a specific site called whereami.com that, you know, that was a challenge in of itself, that we were getting everybody to kind of put their guesses there. But we did do that, and it landed 63,000 people coming to us over 10 days. So, you know, not with a huge budget, we were able to really break through. And, you know, listening to Alex's presentation earlier, I can say that I think that that really works when you have something that has an emotional feeling, that breaks new ground, that thinks things a little bit differently. Despite all the risks that it takes to get there, it does show you that you can kind of really make a powerful statement and try and be unique. It was supported during this time in our second phase with many different mediums. This was a bit of a complicated media plan. I'm just giving you some of the highlights here, but we did kind of launch in that intrigue phase with 60-second creative that I talked to you about. When we revealed, it was at the high point when we knew people were going to be in the cinemas in the summertime seeing major blockbusters. We intentionally did that because we knew we couldn't stay on TV for very long, just couldn't afford it. So we tried to go into the mindset of where people are in the summer and looked at the blockbuster schedule of when we were actually in market, and we were delighted that our summer buy was in cinemas an excellent one. We also had it followed up with a campaign magazine. Many of our partners still like to use a lot of print, and we are happy to work with them on that. So there was a magazine talking a lot about the clues and then the itineraries that would follow. Social, though, was by far the biggest learning area for us. You know, many people talk about Facebook and Twitter. For us, we believe in our organization, it is all about Instagram. Instagram for us is really about the story you get to tell. It's about those beautiful pictures that really get us all liking and looking and sharing. And we thought that that was by far the most powerful tool we could use. So Instagram for us was a driving force and medium, particularly the 7-second video, not easy to do, learned a lot on that. Digital, of course, our web, these are table stakes, our direct email. Media relations was another big part of this in terms of trying to drive stories that would really kind of look at the unfamiliar. Major shift for us in the organization in terms of, you know, usually telling journalists a lot about the familiar things that they want to hear and write and talk about. And we embrace all that. But it's trying to take the story a little further and say, well, actually, down the road from Niagara Falls are great vineyards. Or did you know there's this incredible garden that you can find yourself in? So it was really trying to get people to work together from a media relations point too and think a little differently. You know, we also had our travel information centers. We have 9 of them in the province of Ontario, and we also had them pushing not just the familiar, but the unfamiliar. In the reveal days, this was the big full court press. This was kind of like the big where the money was. We wanted to go large. We had held this secret for 10 days. The game was all on. And we revealed with a giant cinema ad that had Ontario with big drums beating at the end that this is who was talking to you. And then eventually pushing everyone to our site. This is where the time and energy really went into. Have to say, it looks simple on this slide right now, not easy to do. We had to take all of our content, everything that we had shot, work with our partners, find ways of weaving in itineraries that people could use in these new, unique experiences. Because quite frankly, we had a lot of the content that we'd been serving up for some time. So it was important to be able to, if you liked that you saw that in the ad, whether you see any of those there, we were explaining to you what you could do. And we had shot some very different things. I mean, we'd been out in the middle of the night with Nuit Blanche, a very famous festival in Toronto, getting Elvis impersonators. I mean, we were doing different things. So bringing all that content online to reveal in that period of time was really hardworking for our staff, and I'm happy to say we were able to deliver it and do a good job. Here's where we also started to reveal ourselves. So again, you know, if I haven't already mentioned it to you, we like Instagram at Ontario Tourism, and we were really talking about telling you now who we were and introducing ourselves. Again, a lot of thought went into how we did this. And let me just read to you a little bit. I was a question wrapped in history inside a country. Now I'm revealed. Sometimes incredible places are hidden in plain sight. But how well do you really know Ontario? Discover it scene by scene was one of the first things that we put out on our YouTube channel. On Instagram, when we revealed ourselves in our game, it was, I was a question wrapped in history inside a country, now I'm revealed. Sometimes incredible places are hidden in plain sight. But how well do you know us? Learn more here, and so on. So we were able to, over those 2 days, find a really creative way of bringing people in, saying who we were, and really kind of engaging with them. This was a very powerful, important pivot in terms of going from not knowing to who you are. So what happened? Well, great things. 3 times the traffic over the previous year. We were absolutely thrilled. We hadn't seen this much traffic at this particular time, and we had to say we were just thrilled with it. People started calling, folks were taking notice, partners started to want to know more. I always say, if you build it, they will come, because at first when you're doing something very different that, you know, folks really can't necessarily see themselves in yet, but once you start showing some results or seeing actually how you can work together and being collaborative and showing value, they start to want to really talk. And this was one of the first things that we did, is to tell them how it was going. So here are some of the campaign highlights. As I mentioned, the media really did take notice. We started to get calls from not just the traditional marketing, trade magazines, but, newspapers were calling us. The Globe and Mail wanted to speak to us. I mean, for us as an organization, that was one of the first times we had seen folks really from a campaign want to talk to us about how we did it. Largely the questions were how we did this game and why we did it. And, it was kind of the perfect storm of when it was all happening. Our dollar here was really kind of an advantageous moment for us in terms of bringing those Americans across from our border. And so that was the perfect kind of storm, if you will, for all things happening at once and at the right time. So it was lucky for us. We had strong results. So as Catherine can tell you, we do our summer ad tracking. This year we are working specifically with Ipsos Reid. Our ROI, I'm not afraid to admit to you, was not as high as we had wanted, largely because we believe that we really front-loaded our production. And as I mentioned to you, that is something that we are now going to hold on to for quite some time. We have quite a bit of it. We know that we can pull out. In fact, I could probably do versions of this for quite some time. So we do see that as an opportunity to grow over time. But our brand awareness started to go way up. We were thrilled with that. And summer trips were looking at almost doubling. And so again, for us, that was great success in terms of being able to kind of track that and really make sure that that game was working. But here's the one that I think many of you in the room always like to talk about. And again, thanks to our Ipsos partners at the time doing our ROI report, but we are thrilled with the amount of incremental visitation that this campaign brought for us. And as we all know in this room, if they visit, they will spend. And that's what we're always here to do, is to drive that spend, that expenditure, make sure that we're going for folks that really want to stay overnight, move in and around, you know, stay in a great hotel, visit an attraction, buy some souvenirs to go home with, and spend. And so for us, this campaign drove that. So great visitation, great spend numbers were really a big part of economic impact. You know, the tourism industry has such an opportunity to drive this. This was actually in a reverse order of another presentation I gave, where I started with this slide, because I think honestly, tourism is such a powerful economic driver, and we really need to do more to kind of champion that, particularly for us as a government-run organization, to all of our key stakeholders, making sure they see, yes, the marketing can be fun and exciting, and I can tell you lots of stories, but really, it's driving economic impact, and that is jobs for our economy and for folks in our province. So it is a key part for us. I'm happy to say, and I think I saw David in here. Hey, David, welcome. This won the TTRA award last year for the Marketing Campaign of the Year. We were thrilled with that. Again, when you're on the stage with all of your tourism colleagues in Canada, you know, and folks like Destination Canada there at TTRA, this is an exciting time to be able to say, you know, the risk that we took and the work that we did had a great impact, and having industry colleagues kind of see that was really important and exciting for us. So we were just thrilled. But take a look at some of this on the right. So 11.9 million video views. Again, thrilling. You know, and probably more still to come when we relaunch this again in the next version. 63.8 million impressions of people actually taking a second to look at this, see it, think about it. 48,000 social comments. So I told you in the beginning that this game was really about driving that social engagement, and I believe nowadays, if you're going to do that, you need to be able to think about a campaign that's going to do this. This is how people are talking, how they're thinking, how they're sharing, and how they're getting, as Alex said earlier, that fame. It really is through the power of those social comments with one another. And I'll just pause here for a second and say, they weren't all positive. Not at all. I mean, I can stand up here and kind of make you think they were, but they weren't. There was lots of people who had lots of negative things to say. But here's the incredible thing about social media. You know, if somebody says, oh, you know, such and such, they didn't like a scene, whatever that scene may be, it's the power of the community in that social medium to be able to say, well, that's actually not true. I don't believe that. That's not what Canada stands for. That's not who we are as a country. That's not who we are as a province, the great province of Ontario. This is who we are. We are diverse. We are culturally strong. We're better as one. We're open. We're honest. And it was amazing to see people champion great values that we were really trying to also push at the core of who we are. So I just want to make sure you knew that. And the other thing was, you know, when you are doing these types of campaigns, if you Google it, they will come. We saw our search queries go up. In fact, at one point, I think we were in the top 10. Google had reached out to us and said, what's going on? Everybody's kind of trying to figure out who you are, and once we did, are asking more about who you are. So that, I do believe, is another important measure, is figuring out kind of what your search query and what people are Googling, you know. So later on, if you have questions about me and you put my name in, you know, you're going to Google it. So that's kind of the importance nowadays, I think, of the evolution of how things are being measured and what we need to look at. Just 2 weeks ago in Ontario, in Toronto, we host the Marketing Awards. Again, for our organization, this was a big deal. We hadn't won one before. We were awarded a Silver Marketing Award for Integrated. And I highlight this not just to tell you about awards, but because integration to me is one of the things that is the hardest to do. And I loved the fact that we actually won this. We also won for a great television single, but to me, it was the power of integration. The fact that you had all the mediums working, talking, acting with each other is hugely important if you're going to be successful. So measuring all of that is also a major challenge. And I also continue, my colleague Catherine, she did a really good job. Things were constantly shifting and moving, and she was there with us the entire way. So integration and how you do that and how you measure it is highly important. There's additional information for you there in terms of what we did with Twitter and the benchmarks that we kind of exceeded. Again, didn't put as much in Twitter, but what we did put in really did and performed well. But video for us on Instagram was one of the major things that was successful. And sorry, I keep telling you about these awards things, but hey, we got shortlisted last week, which only 3% of entries that go to Cannes actually get shortlisted, and then there's the lucky few that win. We actually got shortlisted, and for our organization, I actually paused everybody to take a minute to understand and know this. Because on the world stage of global marketing and trying to stand out and be unique and different, being shortlisted was for us a great honor. And that honor was also because we were promoting and activating something completely different. Our case study, the one I showed you at the beginning, is the one that we used for our Cannes submission. And it was really talking about the fact that we'd used this game, that we had tried to ask a simple question that was rooted in an insight that we found in social media and our great research. And that simple question generated a conversation that hadn't necessarily been there before, and one that we started. So it was us telling the story. So us being shortlisted in this was, again, another high point for us, and more that we want to continue to do. So let me tell you about the future and where we want to go. We have to keep telling this story. It's essential. If you're going to be successful in this industry, everybody is trying to get somebody to visit them. So making yourself stand out, be unique, and telling stories that are hugely important to the great icons that you have. This is a shot of a vineyard out in St. David's, just outside of Niagara Falls on Niagara-on-the-Lake, a beautiful area of our province. And it's getting people to understand that when you come, there's more to do that you may not know. More that's just in the guidebooks, but what your friends tell you about. Most recently, we brought us and many partners together, brought the hit show from the States Live with Kelly and Ryan. For all you Americans out there, you know, Live with Kelly and now Ryan Seacrest. So us and many folks, including Destination Canada, put this together. And here's what I can tell you. What did Kelly say the first thing when she got up on the first show that she was taping? Oh, you got to try the vineyards in Niagara. And I thought, yes. You know, it's, yes, the spectacular falls, but it's also what's around. So telling the story is hugely important. By the way, she likes Two Sisters. That's the big one she's all about. Yes, it's beautiful. Other mediums, hugely important. So for us in Canada this year, as many of you know, it's Canada's 150, Ontario 150. And Karen, there you are, Ottawa's on the front. Lots of celebrations are going to be happening in our country this summer, just around the corner for our big Canada Day celebrations. So the magazine this year was asking questions, leading everybody to all the events that we can kind of think about that were going to be happening for 150. But here's the part that I really wanted to pause and let you kind of understand where we're going next, and I'm going to play you another video after. Is how do you get the partners to come on board to work with you when you've built a platform? So that's the great big challenge we have in our province. And I can only say this, it's really by saying one by one, collaborating with them and showing the value. So being able to drive your research results, having them understand it, and then building something together. So let me tell you a little story about the next part of this campaign that is currently in market. We have a great partner up in Northern Ontario who wanted to get people to ride the train in the Agawa Canyon in Sault Ste. Marie. And they wanted to do it not just when the leaves turn a beautiful color in the fall, which they're known for, but actually in the summer months. So Ian, our great partner, came to the table. We both put money down. We both wrote a brief together, which doesn't happen very often. We talked about the value each one can bring, the assets each one of us had, what we had in terms of production, what he had for production, and together we created the next version of Where Am I? Now, I got lots of calls from all the magazines saying, now why did you pick Agawa Canyon in Sault Ste. Marie? Well, there's a reason, and that is because this partner wanted to participate with us and wanted to build a model about how we could take a platform, not duplicate efforts, work together, think strategically, and be able to kind of use what each other had to be able to promote during a time of year that he needed help. He needs some expertise. So here's what we did. We were here to kind of really bring value to them and increase their tour train packages, which he has on his website. Bookings in July and August needed to go up. And results to date are 1.3 million video views of the video I'm going to show you promoting the train, 40,000 leads just to him, with 44% of the goal reached, and we still have quite a bit of time in our campaign to go. So it's the power of working together with a platform that works and really being able to kind of think about how to bring visitors to the unfamiliar places that they don't necessarily know about. So that's the story of the Where Am I gamification and its results. And after I play this video, I'd be happy to take any of your questions. Hi, second video, please.
An iron horse leads you north. A wooded canyon draws you in. Where am I?
Powerful, emotional, and if I had the time, I would take you through every one of those scenes and tell you their production versus ours and how we put it all together. But that is the story of Where Am I in the province of Ontario. Thank you. Thanks, Marion. Marion's the chair of our marketing metrics committee.
So I have lived this campaign with Catherine and Lisa at the helm and watched the numbers come in, and I thought this audience needs to hear it. It is just so different. Now, we have had two very dense presentations. I think it's time for a break and for you to catch up with these speakers, engage with them. We will come back at 11:30 for two very brief TTRA talks, and then we'll have lunch and you can engage with the next group of speakers. All right?